Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, December 14th, 2017. All managers are present except Manager Olson, Manager Becker, and Manager Shackleton, though he'll be here shortly. I see no members of the public for matters from the floor, but I do know we have an introduction of a new staff person tonight, Ms. Sylvia. Hi.
Did he realize that we eliminated this job in the earlier meeting?
Oh, he hasn't heard that yet. Yeah, that was humor.
What was in August?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, my name
Go ahead.
is Cole Thompson. I'm here to introduce myself as the new permitting technician within the permitting department. So I figured I'd tell you a little bit about my experience and my educational background. Should I talk into that?
No, you're fine.
Oh, all right. So I received my four-year degree, bachelor's degree from St. Cloud State University in environmental studies, and the reason I chose that program was because it was a well-rounded program, and it would give me the opportunity to become a jack of all trades within the environmental field, kind of no matter where I went. And along the way, I obtained two internships, one with the City of Minneapolis Health Department and one with the City of Lakeville Engineering Department. So with the City of Minneapolis, I was an environmental technician, and I inspected active construction sites for compliance and enforced city codes and ordinances regarding noise, air, water, and land complaints. It was pretty interesting work. And with Lakeville, I continued to work on site inspections regarding single-family homes as well as residential developments as I collaborated with city staff to streamline inspection protocol and framework. And upon graduation, before coming to the Watershed, I worked with SKB Environmental as an environmental specialist. So SKB Environmental is a non-hazardous waste-accepting construction and demolition landfill within Rosemount. And so I worked on health and safety inspections, SWIP compliance, and material testing in a laboratory setting. So I'm just very excited to bring my experience as an inspector to the permitting department to help improve our compliance framework to better serve the watershed stakeholders in a more focused and efficient manner.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
What was a better city to work for, Lakeville or Minneapolis?
You're on the record now.
that was a trick question. That was a trick question.
They were both great.
Minneapolis is in
They
the
were both
watershed
great.
district, so
I loved Minneapolis.
That was a good answer.
So yeah, just excited to be a part of the team.
Excellent. Glad to welcome you.
Yeah, thank you.
We are up to approval of the agenda. There are a few changes we want to make this evening. At item 9.2, please strike that. And at item 12.2, we'll be adding an update for the 325 Blake Road work. And we'll add an item 12.3, which is deed unemployment compensation matter. Are there any other changes to the agenda? We have a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Manager Shackleton moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodman, second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any changes? I'm sorry, that was the wrong thing to say. Any opposition? Under information items, we have an AIS update from Mr. Fieldseth, who was here earlier. Thank you for that. There he is, okay. Consent agenda. Approval of the November 16th board minutes. Approval of the November 27th special board meeting minutes. Resolution 17-072, authorization to purchase water monitoring equipment. Resolution 17-073, authorization to award a contract to RMB Laboratories, Inc. for water quality sample analysis services for 2 years. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Rodman, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton? Mr. Smith?
Madam President, I just have a quick comment on item 7.1.
Okay.
Rather than have it be pulled from the agenda, we've worked with staff on the acquisition of the equipment and need to obtain quotes for both items of equipment. My understanding is that For one of the pieces, they got 2 quotes, which complies. In the second case, they had a discount that's so significant, they know the market for the equipment. They've had discussion with other vendors and have made a record of that. So we think they're in compliance, but we want this to be a part of the minutes for the record, so I just add that comment.
Thanks very much. With that clarification, we already took a vote.
Had not.
Okay. With that clarification, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. I'll catch up pretty soon. President's report. As you know, Bill Olson and I went to the MAUD annual meeting. The resolutions were all handled as recommended by the committee, so we've discussed them. One additional resolution was added at the time to create a stormwater reuse task force to establish recommendations for effective watershed implementation. The process has been going forward, has been state agencies and watersheds want to be sure that they're at the table when the implementation process goes forward, and that, of course, passed. There were 3 bylaws recommendations, having votes on the board tied to dues, having term limits, and having district administrators be eligible to be elected to the board. Those were all voted down, but there was a lot of discussion among other metro watershed districts who had similar conversations to ours about having our dues increased but not our benefits increased. And so I think going forward there should be a dues committee to look at that, because there's a lot of unhappiness from other metros. The board, MAUD board of 9 members had only 7 people going into the meeting. They elected 5 new board members, some from each of the 3 regions. In our region, Craig Leiser from Browns Creek has 1 more year to go, and then he says he'll retire from the board. Barbara Hockey retired, and Mary Texer from Capital Region was elected to succeed her. And there was an empty seat because Perry Forster was no longer eligible, and I was elected to fill out his 2 years. So I'm on the MAUD board.
Congratulations.
I think it'll be great. And I'm going to meet with the next meeting to have a committee for dues analysis. Do that. And if you had any questions about anything else, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I thought I'd just hit the highlights there. Okay, good. Operations and Programs Committee meeting report. Manager Loftus.
Thank you, President White. All the board members, well, everyone up here was there this evening, but for those who might be watching, I suppose, we briefly spoke about agenda priorities and coordinating the operating committee with the planning and programs, also with the CAC, and that will continue to be a discussion into the beginning of 2018. We talked about the IT plan and the next steps. That was an item that was voted on in November and sent to the OPC committee for discussion. There was a lot of comments about outcomes, and I talked a lot about budget, but where we ended up was that Manager Shackleton and our district administrator will work closely to get everybody on the same page and come back at a future date with some recommendations. Let's see, then we moved on to our HR plan, next steps. We didn't come to a conclusion on that item, so it will be discussed again December 21st. Is that where we left that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we were out of time. So we didn't get to the last item on our agenda, which is fine because it was added to the regular agenda tonight.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Manager Miller, CAC report.
Derek is going to give a quick summary last night of the process we went through to try to implement their participation in more of a defining function for the CAC going forward. And I want to compliment Derek for the running the meeting so well, because everybody really felt they were participating and we're going to be listened to. So
Great. Mr. Lochner, Mr. Darren Lochner.
Derek,
Manager White, Board of Managers. And
I know a lot of Derek, so
thank you for that. So this was the last meeting of 2017. I'd just like to say this was a very engaged and very involved citizen advisory committee. And so I was very pleased with their involvement over the past year. So essentially, as you know, we're preparing to discuss the future role of the CAC, a joint meeting with the board, staff, and representatives from the CAC. So last night I led them through a discussion talking about what their roles, expectations are, and talked about why they joined the CAC and what they began through that process. So we'll take that input from the meeting last night and also take input from staff and as well as you as board members and kind of work together when we schedule that meeting in early January. And so look forward to that discussion. Following that discussion is when we'll bring the slate of applications for CAC members for the 2018 calendar year. We have 14 individuals that resubmitted application from the 2017 CAC. We have 12 new individuals that have submitted applications as well. So staff has done a preliminary review of those applications and we'll be able to provide some comments when we bring that before the board in January.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Manager Miller?
No, I thought it was a good process and everybody participated really well.
Thank you, Mr. Lochner. Our upcoming meeting event and schedule is printed here. We note tentative dates for January because we haven't yet adopted a calendar. We'll move on to item 9.1. This is the statutorily required public comment period on the budget. Were there members of the public here to comment, we should go through a presentation, but given that there are not, unless the manager is dying to see the presentation again, we'll just move on.
Because it is recorded and people can, I think it might be helpful to have it on record, the presentation.
Okay.
It's just a thought, but.
Mr. Erdahl.
Madam President, can I just introduce a
Certainly.
comment as Mr. Erdahl gets up? You adopted your annual budget and levy in your September meeting. And under the Watershed law, that's when it's required to be done. There's a separate law in the truth and taxation process that requires all local units of government to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the budget one more time before the county auditors set the property tax levies. So the purpose of this evening is an informational opportunity for anyone who wishes to comment on the budget to do so. And you are free to consider whatever comments are made, if any, and you need take no action. You only would take action if you wish to further reduce your budget and levy prior to the end of December.
Okay, with that explanation, I withdraw my recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your contribution here. Ready and
I
willing.
just have one question.
Manager Loftus.
My only question would be, is there any review or consideration of decreasing the levy or the budget from September, or is it exactly the same as being proposed?
Thank you, Manager Loftus and managers. The proposal is to go forward with the budget as recommended. There will be some additional adjustments based on some changes and some savings realized from some personnel changes as part of the human resources plan structure compared to what was in the budget. So I had a conversation earlier this afternoon with Manager Loftus, and we could try to capture some of those savings as a budget reduction at this point, or we could kind of look at them in kind of a package deal with all of them. Some positions will be increased in terms of their compensation based on added responsibilities and duties and authorities. Some will be some have been eliminated, or some will be reduced. So if we wanted to kind of do that as a package deal, or as they come along, we could do either direction.
And Mr. Smith, we call this a budget public comment. The levy is what's significant, but is this in fact called a budget review, or is it a levy review?
Madam President, it's really both, but the most significant issue would be if you wish to, you may during the course of the year make adjustments to your budget, but you need to adopt one by September 15th, which you've done. And you need to certify your tax levies to the county auditors, which you have done. And you're free to consider any other input and make any adjustments downward. before the end of the year, if you wish.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let's move to item 11.1, Resolution 17075, approval of Medina Local Water Plan. Ms. Christopher.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, managers. So this is the first in what's going to be a whole new round of local water plan updates that are going to be coming in front of the board. The last of which were mainly in 2008, 2009. This time around, all of them are due by the end of 2018, so they'll be coming pretty quickly, and this is just the first one we've received. We've gotten one other draft so far that they're still kind of working on refining, but they'll be coming to you soon. So just as a kind of a refresher, some background information. So under Minnesota statute and rule, the district has the authority to approve local water plans, as well as to assign responsibilities to local government units for carrying out implementation actions that we define in our plan. And our approach to this has shifted pretty significantly between our old plan and the new draft plan, where the primary focus really under our new plan is on promoting collaboration, integrated planning with the cities. And it's really relies more on kind of an incentive framework than mandating that the cities do certain actions. So in the last plan, the focus was really pretty heavily on cities achieving certain load reduction requirements that we assigned, essentially the TMDL framework. And with this plan, we've felt that that's no longer necessary or the most productive way to move forward. So really, like I said, it's about kind of laying out incentives, demonstrating the value that the district can add through early coordination and really integrated planning. And so we're, some of the requirements really in the plan are really more voluntary this time around, with the understanding that with a stronger plan, with stronger coordination from cities comes greater responsiveness from the district, and that we're more able to plan, align goals, and allocate resources accordingly, with a clear understanding of what some of the opportunities and goals of our partners are. So in terms of timeline, as I mentioned, cities have until the end of 2018 to update their local water plans. Some are wrapping up, some are just getting underway. And our plan, of course, is still not yet adopted. James and I actually presented to the Bowser Central Region Committee at the end of November, and the committee expressed strong support and recommended approval, which will be going to the full board next Wednesday. So we're anticipating Bowser approval at that time, and then it'll be coming to the board for adoption at the January workshop.
Can I ask a question?
Manager Miller?
What was the response? Because obviously our format is different than with their traditional submissions that they receive
Sure.
from the other water management organizations.
Sure, yeah, very glowing, I would say. I think, some of the comments, if I can recall, I don't know if James is planning to give more of an update, but we heard, that's very unique, that they, very professional, they've never seen anything like it kind of thing, and they, were interested in learning more and helping to, kind of get the message out of our approach. Yeah, it was very, very supportive. There were also comments about how they're going to need to kind of think differently about how they're evaluating progress, how they're doing reporting, some of those kinds of things. So very open to it, very supportive, and we communicated that we really want to continue the conversation with them in terms of how to kind of share this as a model to further develop and promote it through potentially policy change, working with them, working with other state, regional agencies. And so there's a lot of potential there for us to continue
Great.
engaging with them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So kind of back to the timeline, as I said, ours is not yet adopted, and so this is the only plan where we should really run into this situation where they're technically subject to our current plan, but they have agreed to meet the requirements of the new plan, and so they're really kind of meeting both sets of requirements. So just to kind of orient you, and sorry, I guess I can't point in any way, but so Medina, it's kind of the yellow square outline there, and they've got 3 different water management organizations that. Oh, I can. Okay.
We discovered this when the IT consultant was here.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so they've got Pioneer Sarah that they're part of, Elm Creek as well, and then we have kind of the lower third to a half of the city is within our watershed. And there's 3 different sub-watersheds that are part of Medina. So we've got Thies in there somewhere, draining to Katrina, down to Painter Creek. And then in the middle portion of the sub-watershed, or of the city, we've got School Lake going down to Woolsfeld, as well as Holy Name coming in, and that's all part of Long Lake Creek. And then they've got a little bit of Mooney Lake, which is part of Gleason over in the kind of the southeast corner. And in terms of kind of major water bodies, like I said, we've got Katrina, this one is unnamed, School, Woolsfeld, Holy Name, Mooney, and then they've also got, in terms of significant resources, the Woolsfeld Woods Scientific and Natural Area, as well as just other significant areas of biodiversity, quality habitat. Just to go through a few kind of highlights of the plan. One of the areas we were most interested in, of course, are kind of what they've identified as priority actions or partnership opportunities. One thing that they talked about that the board is familiar with is this regional partnership that has formed between Long Lake, Orono, Medina, the district, and the Long Lake Waters Association, where they're really trying to get together and align kind of goals and collectively work on making progress towards some of the TMDL requirements and other things within the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. And one of the kind of early priorities that have been identified is potentially carp assessment and management. There was a joint grant application that went out a while back that was to Hennepin County that was unfortunately not successful, but they're still working on exploring that as an opportunity to.
Long Lake isn't in Long Lake?
They are part of it as well.
Part of it.
Yep, all 3 cities and the Lake Association, which has been very active and engaged, and then they've been pulling in the district as well. We've presented to them a number of times and had some different meetings. So that's an exciting opportunity. We're really glad to see them taking kind of more of a regional approach, and so definitely some projects or work that could come out of that partnership. Other areas that they flag as opportunities to partner with the district are stormwater management when they're doing road reconstructions. There's a couple that are slated within the next few years. They're interested in looking at internal load management, again, whether that's through carp management or potentially other things in the future once we have a handle on what's going on with carp. And then they're also interested and open to partnering on any other bigger restoration projects that the district might want to do down the road, wetland or stream restorations, or potentially looking at some of our existing ponds and whether there's ways to retrofit for greater treatment out there. And what's nice, again, with kind of the regional focus is they're open to partnering on things that are not necessarily within the city. They're looking at it really as a whole system. And then they also flag, Woolsfeld Woods. There's some known erosion and other things out there where that's another potential area to work with both the district or potentially the DNR to address some of those things. And then a few other things they mentioned focus more kind of on the E. coli impairment for Painter Creek is education and outreach around manure and pet waste management, as well as they're planning to adopt a manure management ordinance for some of their bigger operations out there. And then really one of the main things we're looking for in this round of local water plan updates is a coordination plan that lays out kind of a commitment for how they're going to really have early coordination with us. And so some of the things they've identified are an annual meeting, which is something we've kind of long done, but are looking to make more effective use of, where the focus would really be on kind of exchanging, reviewing CIPs, other plans for the coming year for both the district and the city. They, I believe, are already pretty effectively coordinating in terms of sending us land use approvals during kind of the early stages. So before things go to their planning committee, they're copying us on those opportunities. They have committed to requiring, that they'll make sure that applicants have a district permit before they issue their own. They will involve us in technical evaluation panels for Wetland Conservation Act, which they are the local government unit for. And they've also committed to, sharing data on an annual basis for any new relevant information. And then one other thing that they noted is that they're going to be looking to us for is to help identify funding opportunities, whether that's our own grants, external grants, other things that we can kind of help them connect with. And then in terms of kind of the regulation piece, I'm not proposing any changes there. They're still relying on us to implement our rules within the city, and they will remain the LGU for Wetland Conservation Act. So those are kind of the main highlights I wanted to cover, and staff is recommending approval. I've provided a couple of rounds of comments. We've also met to discuss mainly the new plan requirements and goals, and they've adequately addressed those comments. They're meeting all the requirements of statute and rule, and both our current and upcoming plan, as I mentioned. And then just a couple other things I wanted to note. Like I said, a lot more of these are going to be coming your way soon. And so we're really kind of thinking through how to kind of make best use of this process, get the most we can out of these plans and coordination plans, and then thinking about how to actually turn that into action and make sure the coordination actually is happening. And we're going to be discussing that to some degree, I think, next week at the PTC, but we're considering, things like procedural changes, policy changes, both kind of at the local and kind of state and regional level, using tools like MOUs, which we've often done with partners, and then also just a big piece is, of course, the relationships that are really going to be essential to making this whole approach successful. So continuing to think about those things, and we'll continue that conversation with the board. So with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Let me first ask for a motion to approve the resolution. Manager Shackleton, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Now I'll take questions. I'll let you take questions. I have a process question going forward, since this is the first of the series. Yeah. We're approving a resolution, we're approving their plan. Is that the right language? Mm-hmm. Approving their plan, but we don't have the plan attached. Now, maybe it's 3 million pages and I don't want to read it. Do we want to have it in the packet? Do we want to attach it, or let people go find it?
Good question. Yeah, I've provided a link. It is quite lengthy, which is why I didn't attach it, so I don't know if...
I didn't read carefully. Oh, dear. Okay, no.
Suffice.
Yeah, that's good. You can tell I didn't read it then. Oops. Manager Miller.
The questions about our plan calls for further integration with the city's early planning. How are we selling that to like a city of Medina, where they retain some of their authorities, and which would kind of imply that at least superficially imply that they want less interference than rather than more cooperative effort. How do we sell them on early notices of proposals and improvements, etc.?
Sure. Yeah, I think it is just, again, a lot of kind of relationship building and communication, and we've done a lot of that over the last couple of years through the committees and other meetings that we've had with cities, and it's just sharing examples of success stories and really demonstrating, like I said, the benefits that they can achieve in terms of better being able to meet their goals, doing things kind of faster, cheaper, in terms of us being able to streamline regulation, potentially provide funding sources for them to tap into. helping with kind of technical and design work. And so it is really just a lot of communication, which is time consuming but worthwhile. And I think we are in a really good place with Medina in terms of understanding that and seeing the value of it, and they are very, I think, willing to work with us and understand the benefit.
This is just, is okay?
Go ahead.
We got 29 cities, and some of them have a smaller staff than others, some are more technical than others. How do we lay out a common platform in order to achieve this goal? I mean, it's more cities with a larger staff is a little easier because they're more specialized, whereas some cities don't have the staff, or they contract with outside firms to do some of their staff work. It seems to me that it's really a complex issue.
It is, and it is something we're still kind of working on figuring out, and it is going to, I think, just be a little bit different with each city in terms of how successful this is and how much effort we maybe need to put in, or where we're really kind of prioritizing and focusing depending on what opportunities we see. And yeah, I think it is particularly challenging with cities that are more consultant reliant in terms of having that relationship. And so we're trying to make sure, we're really having to kind of reach everyone we can in terms of making sure the staff and the consultants understand what we're trying to do. And yeah, I think with the first couple rounds of plans, drafts that we've gotten, they haven't been where we've wanted them, because it's been mainly consultant driven, and so we've really tried to engage with the staff, make sure they understand what we're looking for, what we're expecting, and what the benefit is, and then trying to get them to kind of drive things a little more. But yeah, it is going to be challenging.
Manager Miller?
How do we institutionalize this? I know that you got relationships, and people trust you, and they're comfortable. Now, what happens, when you're promoted or something? I don't know, or you quit. That's not a choice. It seems to me a lot of this is just based on personal relationships right now. That's just my perception.
Yeah, Manager Miller, managers, I think, that's one of the reasons we want to get it in the plan, get it documented, so it's in front of the council, it's in front of the staff, they understand. The coordination plan calls out what are the different departments we need to connect with, who's the point person, do they understand? So we're trying to kind of reach out all these different ways and to really make it effective. Because yeah, we recognize that those are challenges, and we're still figuring some of that out and learning, kind of still in the learning process of what works with what cities and how, like I said, how we're going to actually put it into action.
I hate to belabor this, but it seems to me, at least in my mind, it's kind of complicated. I think most cities, unless we're working with them very closely, giving them money and working with their projects or whatever, would view us just the old-fashioned way. We're regulators, and it would seem that reviewing these plans, if we could do it in a public way, accepting it, and going through our vision, mission, state, kind of thing with in the public forum, so people get really understanding of that we're partners because we believe in what they're doing and can make a contribution to it, rather than just dealing with with the department heads or whatever, especially in some of these smaller towns, where if we can get the policymakers understanding what we're trying to do and adopt it in some formal way. I don't know. I'm sure you thought about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We've had obviously some policymaker engagement through this whole process, but they're, certainly haven't reached everyone, and I think that's something we're trying to think about moving forward. is it something we want to do routinely in terms of, council, making the rounds to city councils to kind of get this message across? And, as we know cities are working on their plans, we've certainly been reaching out and trying to get meetings with them to make sure, like I said, that the staff are understanding, not just it's not just the consultants working on it, but yeah, not necessarily getting policymakers into that. But I think if there's particular cities where we anticipate them, not really, they haven't been engaged thus far, and we don't think they really understand that, that might be worth kind of that added effort of presenting to the councils or that kind of thing.
Mr. Whisker, do you want to add something?
I always do.
When you're sitting there, you
I always
look
do.
like you want to.
And President White, managers, and Manager Miller, this is going to be one of the principal focuses of the Planning and Policy Committee in the coming months. As we mentioned, one of the key components of the Strategic Action Plan is going to be figuring out how developing a real actionable plan for how we influence land use policy, which is just a catch-all for all of the things that you just mentioned, which is how do we turn this model that was extremely organic and relational in Minnehaha Creek, in Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and we've picked that up and done it more intentionally in 6 Mile. How do we do that system-wide and institutionalize that through policy change? I think in some instances it's going to be just internal cultural change, procedural changes with folks like Public Works, park planners, folks in economic development, because it's got to be both codified in policy, but then implemented by the people that are working in these departments. So this is the focus of the Planning and Policy Committee, is to figure out what are all the different ways that we can work with communities, both locally and then at a system scale at a regional state level, whether it's Met Council policy or state policy on how local surface water plans are integrated, all that kind of stuff. So this is coming. We are thinking about it. I think the surface water plans, when we get into this issue in more detail, are one piece of a 50 to 100 piece puzzle. They're important, but right now the culture around local surface water plans is they're off to the side from the comprehensive plan. We'll talk about this next week when we bring the Victoria comprehensive plan forward. They're treated as a technical exercise, a regulatory exercise in a lot of ways, a box check-in, and then they're often consulted out separately from the actual comprehensive plan. So they're important. They start to memorialize a document that the City Council is approving, and we're approving some general expectations for coordination, but as we've experienced, if we want to coordinate on capital improvement programs or economic development and development review and permitting, roads, water, sewer, parks, sometimes having a policy document that's more simple and less of a regulatory tool, like a memorandum of understanding like we've had with Victoria or Edina or others, makes that more present and creates that policy mandate. We also need to look at within the actual procedures or practices that staff go through to do their work. I made the rounds this week with Hennepin County Transportation Operations versus Transportation Design, talking about internally how do they change their processes so that we know what the county's 5-year capital improvement plan is for roads, and we're planning for the 4th and 5th year out rather than receiving a permit for those projects when they're at 60% design. So I think there's a whole range of things that we can do, both relational, changing policy at a staff level, policy top down, and then there's examples of how we can memorialize that at more of a regional scale. Right now, the Met Council will approve a comprehensive plan without an approved surface water plan. So it's not fully integrated into the comp plan development process, which cities place a lot more emphasis on. So we're thinking about all those things, but what we're going to want to do is prioritize which ones we think will give us the most return on our time investment. I think the board's dedicated some staff to this. Within the HR plan, we have Becky's position as senior policy planner and Renee's position that's transitioning. And as Lars mentioned earlier, we've been heavily engaged in the selection process for the education communications staff person, and a lot of what you just asked were key questions in that process, and bringing somebody on is how are we going to make these changes. So we'll talk about that more next week and then on an ongoing basis thereafter.
Thank you. Anything else, or are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Christopher. Mr. Whisker. Item 11.2 is Resolution 17076, approval of the 2018 calendar. Mr. Friddle.
Thank you, President White and managers. I'll draw your attention to the calendar that's put together with a few specific dates I wanted to kind of point out. Two are ones that don't actually have dates, just the month and the year for board retreats that are still to be scheduled. So those were kind of placeholder pieces for the end of January and also the end of May. Also on June 28th, there's an asterisk next to that one because that has the potential to be changed based on the MAUD summer meeting. Some years we've have adjusted our schedule to accommodate that. So that will be a decision point as we go into the year. And then two other dates just to kind of clarify that we're a little bit of a departure from the second and fourth Thursday pattern is the month of November and December. We've shifted those on an annual basis just to based on the calendar and the holiday schedules there. So we're just putting that into the schedule from the beginning this year. And I think some managers had some questions about time and scheduling. So if others have suggestions for that, that's another thing that we can kind of discuss before approving or as part of the approval.
Okay. I would say that we can take the asterisk away from June 28th. The summer tour will be June 20th to 22nd.
Okay,
And the
perfect.
Annual meeting also does not conflict with any of our schedules, so that's not an issue this year. Managers, look at the first paragraph about committee meeting times and board times. Is that how we want to go forward this year?
I thought we decided that we would change the board meeting start to 7 p.m. rather than the 6:45.
We discussed it and didn't decide, so this is the place to make that decision. 7 o'clock.
I would propose that.
I think it gives us a little additional time for committee work, which is good.
Mhm. Anything else?
I had one other suggestion.
Mhm.
I would, just kind of with our current practice, I would propose calling our regular meetings all board meetings versus board meeting and board workshop, if that's acceptable. If there's no legal reason why we can't, I think it clarifies it, or it follows what we're doing.
Sounds good to me. I like that idea.
Good.
Anything else? So then, Manager Miller.
The additional 15 minutes isn't going to
Make a difference.
make enough difference. I would think that we could move it to 7:15, so we got full 2 hours
For committee?
for committee. Yeah.
They say work expands to fill time, maybe conversation does too.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
that.
I'm not quarreling with you, I'm
Yeah.
trying to be funny.
No, it's very, it's true, actually. But I just think giving ourselves enough, get 2 full hours would be helpful.
Anyone have an opinion?
Be a lot of work in the committees.
Yeah.
I like starting right at the top of the hour. It versus a quarter hour standardizes a little bit, but I understand the point.
Well, just thought, okay.
Well, I purposely had us discuss before there's a motion, so somebody
I don't
gets to make a
have a
motion.
firm opinion on that.
You're going to be late anyway.
Oh.
He works. He works. So could I have a motion to approve the schedule
So moved.
with the changes that we noted, moving the meeting time to 7 and striking the reference to the June meeting? And do we want to keep the retreats on as a placeholder or not?
Yes.
Okay, and I see that it says 17 on the board retreat in January, so we'll just change that number too.
I'll be out of town that day.
Okay. So, is someone willing to make that motion?
I did.
Manager Miller, I'm sorry, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Manager Shackleton, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Got that weighty business taken care of. Item 11.3, employment separation agreement, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. You received an email earlier this week from legal counsel for the district with an attorney-client privileged document to explain the specifics of an employment separation agreement. So that's brought forth for your consideration this evening. And I don't know if you want to mention any other comments on that, or?
Madam President, I think the board's apprised of the matter and happy to answer any questions if you have them, recognizing our posture here.
So the appropriate motion would be to approve the employment separation agreement. Is there a motion?
And I think it would be to direct me to finalize or execute the agreement.
Great, thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus and Manager Rognus. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No, which should be recorded.
Okay. Carries with 4 votes. Now just hit the pause button here for a moment. Oh, no, not yet. 12.1, adoption of a conservation easement stewardship policy, Ms. Schaufler.
Can I, is this the policy that Manager Becker asked for?
Yes.
As a courtesy, shouldn't we lay this over till he's present?
Yeah, I was going to speak to that, Manager Miller, but
Pardon?
I was going to speak to that.
Okay.
It's not for action this evening.
Yeah, it's just for
Alright,
consideration. So yeah, Madam Chair, managers, so tonight I just want to seek the board members that are here feedback, and then I was going to connect with Manager Becker offline to see if he had any additional comments, and if he does, then I'll incorporate those into this and then bring it back to final action at next week's board meeting. So what's in your packet is just for review for tonight. So I just wanted to quickly walk through background and then just a brief overview of the details of the easement or the policy itself. So the purpose is just to establish a consistent framework for the district to use for all of its conservation easements, and also ensuring that we have a sound record. So if we do are faced with a potential violation, we have some good solid background to go into that. So just walking through the framework, there's 6 excuse me, different elements of it. So just briefly touching on them, communication piece of it is just trying to be proactive in providing regular communication with the owners to maintain positive relationships. And then that also allows the district to remain informed of current land use changes or things that the landowner might be planning to do, so we can be a little bit proactive with those conversations. And then in that, I did add in a piece from the last committee meeting that you reviewed about connecting with newly elected officials. That was brought up in the committee last time about when there is new elected officials, if they are the fee owner of a current easement, then providing a communication package with them explaining our easements and this policy. And then notice and approvals is just simply reviewing requests from fee owners if they do need any district action or district approvals to do any approved or allowed actions within the easement. And then the monitoring section just covers that staff will try to inspect easements at least twice a year, and inviting landowners to accompanying staff to do that. Identifies how will inspections be carried out, and then also walking through how the board will be appraised of potential violations. And then the compliance section discusses how, it's important to do careful documentation if a violation is discovered, and then discusses a progressive enforcement approach if it does come to that. And then that's the main section that I added some pieces to based on the committee's feedback. So talking about the minor versus major violations and providing some characteristics of each of those. So if we are presented with something, we can help identify that, and then that'll help inform the direction the board would like to take. And then the last 2 sections are just reporting to the board, which this piece goes into. So the board will be apprised of potential violations through electronic notification of our inspection reports. At that time, then the board can decide if they'd like it to come to a board meeting for discussion, and then the board can then decide how to escalate as needed from there. And then the last section is just what we call title records, which is just coordinating with legal counsel to preserve recorded and registered easements, so the district's protected and has the ability to enforce its easements moving forward. So the last thing I just want to note was this is one policy, but they're moving forward. There may be future sub-policies or template documents that we'll bring back for board consideration as we start using this policy and try to fine tune it. So again, tonight I'm not seeking any formal action, but just if the board has any comments, and then I'll touch base with Manager Becker offline to see if he has any additional things as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is really a good policy. I think I'm really glad that Manager Becker suggested it, and thank you for the work you've done here. I have a couple, just one question. I noticed in a couple of places it refers to, and I want the legal counsel maybe to weigh in too, refers to waiving the right to enforce by not following through with something. I know the language of our Big Island Conservation easement specifically says if we don't enforce one thing or don't enforce it promptly, we haven't waived our right to enforce it. So I wanted to make sure that that's not a problem. Because I don't think we can agree to waive, but I just wanted to note that that was maybe not entirely accurate.
Madam President, which is not accurate?
That we can waive the right to enforce by not moving promptly.
Madam President, I'll speak this, Ms. Schaffler may want to comment. What we want to be mindful of is over time, notwithstanding the legal language, it's similar to the concept of adverse possession.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you allow someone to trespass over your property over and over and over again to the point where they feel like they could claim an interest,
Mm-hmm.
you're starting to compromise your own interest. And so it is not inappropriate to have language in the easement that indicates that if the district hesitates on enforcement on one occasion, it's reserving the right to come back.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to be in our policy ever mindful of kind of the ongoing relationship.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything else? Manager Miller?
Have we heard back from Orno on our letter, or do we know it was submitted to the city council? And
It was mailed before Thanksgiving? I don't know. I haven't followed the council actions.
Right after, it was mailed to the mayor, and I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but I think that was the beginning of last week. I think it was after Thanksgiving. Okay. And also emailed to each individual council member, and also to the city administrator, and to all of you. So that was emailed to all on the same day. I think. And I've heard just anecdotally some communications back from the city administrator and one of the council members saying that they did receive it and they acknowledged it, and I don't know if it's made its way into any kind of official proceedings for the city council.
okay, thank you.
Anything else on the stewardship policy?
That's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Now here's where we get to hear about 325 Blake Road from Ms. Payman.
Good evening, Madam Chair and managers. I will provide a brief update that we did not get to during the committee meeting, and then we can go to council to sort of guide us into closed session if the board so chooses regarding the right-of-way acquisition. And this will be a very brief update, what was sort of planned for the committee meeting, but as we had discussed the last time we had convened, which was when we were convening for closed session to deal with some other considerations with 325 Blake Road, we talked a little bit about coming back to the board to talk about the operational plan, or the operations as it consists of decommissioning and property management until we can demolition the site. Just to before I get into the operations and sort of site vacancy, I want to remind the board that RFQ will actually go out on Monday. So it will be released on Monday at 3:30 p.m. and it will be all web-based. So it'll actually go out via email, but everything will be accessible via our web. And I want to note that Sarah Bamani has done a really great job of sort of creating some new web pages and getting everything ready for access. So they'll be able to receive all of the attachments, which are significant that way. And this week we've actually been meeting with a variety of other developers just to introduce them to the district and our vision for the site with the city, sort of hand in hand. So it's been a really good week and an interesting week, to say the least, in terms of what we're learning from some of the development communities. So you'll see that, and obviously that will be forwarded to the board on Monday as well, so you're aware of progress that moves forward. At that point, I should note that any communication from there forward is directed to staff. It'll be to me, so we're making sure that city or council members or board managers aren't answering questions or comments to specific developers. We want to be sure that all developers receive the same feedback and information. So we'll treat it much like a big
Can I ask a
process.
question?
Could you,
Have the developers been told that they're not supposed to contact?
It's
Okay.
Manager Miller, it's explicit in the RFQ, so,
Okay.
and it will be part of, the sort of the notification when we send out the
Great.
email, so. Regarding operations and site vacancy, we talked a little bit about this. The site, EA Sween, our tenant, left on November 30th. We did our final walkthrough on December 1st. And as you know, any of the inquiries regarding sort of short-term needs just weren't found to be financially feasible. So we do have a vacant site for the most part. I should note, we do have a couple of ground leases, and the benefit to those is actually they're storing trailers. And one of the tenants, being EA Sween, they've actually agreed to continue to sort of park trailers up to the building and some of the loading docks, so it'll help with some of the site activity and making it appear that maybe it's a little bit more busy than it is now that they are gone. The staff is working to sort of roll off the operations and demolition into one, and a lot of that has to do with the actual operations plan, so we can manage the site prior to demolition. And so our goal is to actually have the site closed, and by closed we mean the system decommissioned and ready for demolition on the first. We know that that's not feasible now, only because some of the calcium chloride that we need to get off the site requires a certain timeline for us to actually discharge it. But we are moving pretty quickly through the defrosting process. We have them defrosting rooms right now, and we have a bobcat that goes in there every other day. Being that it's vacant, they can just move all the ice out with a bobcat. So they're doing that every other day for a few hours. So it's moving along pretty well. And we are sort of working under the current contracts we have with, our current structures with LaSalle, CBRE, and Gartner as sort of a consultant and then subs. So we're modifying those contracts in the scope of work, but everything seems to be falling well within line of what was planned for operations. So we are developing a property management and decommissioning plan. We've gotten feedback from all of our consultants or sub-consultants, and with really the goal of making sure we have the system decommissioned and we're ready for demolition, but doing so in a way that's mindful of safety and security until we're able to actually start that demolition process. So when I note here that some of the scope of work and management structure and whatnot is in development, that's really essentially just a modification to the current contracts and the current scope of work, but we're working through that with them to make sure that everyone's on the same page, being that we're now sort of transitioning from repairs and maintenance to the HVAC system to full decommission of it. So, but all of it falls within the operating plan. And then we're working closely with CBRE to ensure that, we're padlocking or barring doors where needed and turning temperatures to the appropriate level for water mains and things of that nature. So, security and site maintenance and insurance and all those components. So I think we're in a really good place, and I think we're confident that we'll be able to sort of whittle down the monthly operating expenses to a much more manageable amount than what it is with a 10-acre freezer being operational. So we can certainly keep the board apprised as to what we get that down to once we have Gartner off-site and sort of a locked-up facility. We'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the operational plan.
thank you. Any questions from Mr. Heyman? Mr. Manager?
So what are you doing with the ice when they take it out on a forklift?
They managers they just open up the back doors and push it right out the back, and it just piles of ice, which is how it's always. It's just pure water that forms on the coils on the ceiling. Historically, they had to actually place boxes and other things underneath to catch it because they were storing food.
So there's a bunch of regulations, the FDA, they had to do one coil at a time. Now they're able to just let it come down and then we can move it out. It's a pretty eerie facility being empty, but it's just giant concrete floors and they can go right out the back doors.
What are you learning from so you said you met with developers this week and you learned some things. What are you learning?
Managers, checking the managers, a lot of it really is just regarding how they would go about maybe taking down the site, what their timeline would be, just clarity for us in terms of what, how a developer approaches this versus how the watershed district would. And, hearing what they would envision their timelines being, if light rail exists versus if it doesn't, and how many years, and what type of mixed use they would envision putting on the site, which I will say most of it is very consistent with what we heard through the ULI TAP, because that was a panel of developers. But it's just interesting getting a little bit of different perspective from the development community as to how they would handle the ratio of affordable on the site and whether it would be sort of mixed income units versus trying to do it as separate units. A variety of things like that. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, at this point, we have 2 closed session items and an administrator's report. So one question I have to make this flow better is, are there other staff people contributing to the administrator's report so that we should have it first? Okay. So we're going to need, just to make it flow better, 2 motions. And Mr. Smith, if you would state the reason, first of all, for the item 12.2.
Madam President, the district is in discussions about right-of-way acquisition for a portion of the property at 325 Lake Road. And so we would first request to go into closed session for the purpose of discussing the valuation and considering offers relating to that right-of-way acquisition.
So let's stop there and see if we can get a motion to go into closed session for that purpose.
So
Manager Shackleton moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodgers. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Then, staying here, we'll go on to 12.3.
Yes, and Madam President, just for the record, it's 325 Lake Road in Hopkins. We need to identify the property.
Thank you.
Secondly, Madam President, we have a request to go into closed session to discuss a deed unemployment compensation claim.
All right, is there a motion to go into closed session?
Second.
Manager Rodgers and Manager Miller.
quick question.
Manager Shackleton.
Can we do that concurrently, or does it have to be sequentially? Sorry. Do we go into closed session for 2 purposes, or do we go into closed session for 1 purpose and then a second purpose?
I think both are true, Manager Shackleton. Madam President, Manager
Yes.
Shackleton,
Half the board goes into one meeting and the other half.
Well, no, I'm thinking from a motion perspective. We've closed meetings and then reopened them to do something because they don't pertain to the purpose for closing. And if we're doing,
Madam President, we're just making a record of the purpose for the closed session, which will deal with 2 items, and we'll deal with them sequentially. And when we're completed, the record will note that we dealt with them in the time that we concluded them. We'll come back out for the administration report.
okay,
Because we haven't gone into closed session yet.
understood, but
Yeah.
it's procedure, process, that's all.
I had a motion second. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We will now go into closed session for the 2 purposes. We're back in open session for the administrator's report.
Madam President, before we go to the administrator's report, I wanted to note for the record that when we went into closed session about the property at 325 Lake Road, we identified the parcel 325 Lake Road, but there were also 2 other parcels. They were 415 Blake Road and 427 Blake Road, and we'll note that for the minutes for the record as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for catching that.
I just have a real brief update on some communications we've had with John Jaski at Bowser regarding some questions he's had about Nokomis and Lake Hiawatha area from Representative Wagenius, that he's had a meeting earlier this week with her. Our staff has been part of kind of an interagency technical advisory group that's been formed to kind of help address the program. So we've kind of shared some of that context with him in advance of his meeting with her, and are our goal and hope is that it will continue with the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board kind of leading the way and hopefully a co-leading role for the DNR. And we will continue to work with them as that kind of an advisory role throughout the process as well. So we're engaged, but we're kind of looking for those other agencies to take the lead in that process. And that's really my only.
Okay. And I'm smacking my forehead when of that motion. We got an award or a gift at the MAUD meeting for our 50th anniversary. It was a clock, and it's engraved very nicely. I had it sitting out and forgot to bring it, so I'll bring it next week. They had two 50th anniversary and two 60th anniversary watersheds that got gifts. The watershed of the year was Cedar River, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and the employee of the year was Phil Belfiore from Bryce Creek Watershed District. So.
Quick housekeeping.
Mhm.
Are we gonna pull together a quorum for next week? That close to the holiday? Is everyone gonna be here? Okay. Because it sounds like
Yeah.
Bill will still be gone, right? So, okay, I just wanted
It's
to
on,
check.
it's on
Yeah, good
Thursday?
question.
Is Becker going to be back?
I
I
think
don't
so.
know. I didn't hear.
I'm not sure.
I don't know
Okay.
where he's.
We can make sure we know that.